My name is Tiffany Luke. I am the owner of Release, Restore, Redefine Counseling, and so excited to be in community with all of y'all today. Of course, R3 Counseling on Instagram and Facebook, and we are just going to have this amazing conversation, Dr. Tarver and I, tea time with Dr. Tarver, about beautiful healing tools, modalities, collaboration, being in community with each other as providers, as we help to heal and help to just be supportive of the people that we serve. So again, feel free to drop a comment in the chat and somebody will respond, because I don't even know where the chat box is. So I'm just, naming it.
We'll find it.
We'll find it.
Well, hi, everyone. I am Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I'm in Columbus, Georgia. And I will be joining this conversation tonight, facilitating some good dialogue, as Tiffany said. I think that a lot of people are a little confused about all of the options that are available to be able to process trauma. And so we're going to have a good conversation about what that looks like and how you can have multiple providers who work together collaboratively in order for you to get to your optimal level of wellness, because that's our goal for you, recognizing that we all have different strengths, talents, licensure, training, all of those things. So I'm going to launch right in. Tiffany, we've been talking about, or I use the word trauma, but I know that on social media, trauma is a word that has gotten, I think, probably maybe misused, underused, and overused all at the same time. So can you tell everyone what it means to actually experience trauma? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, that's only if you've had military trauma. So can you please share?
I can. And so one of the things, Dr. Tarver, I spoke to you briefly about, like, hey, as clinicians, we use a book called the DSM, and that has specific criteria to diagnose someone with trauma. But greater than diagnosis, looking beyond check boxes, trauma is anything that is overwhelming for your system. Our capacity to cope and respond with things that leave us feeling helpless, out of control, or even hopeless at times. Any experience that is too much, too fast, or too soon can be traumatic. Now, is that a big T, such as going off to war or experiencing like a gunshot wound or somebody dying towards gun violence? No, it may not be a big T. May it qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD? Maybe not, but that doesn't mean it's not traumatic. And so those are those little T experiences. Maybe someone that has experienced bullying. We think about racial trauma, sexual trauma, institutional trauma. There are so many types, developmental, emotional trauma. Statistically, greater than 70% of the population has experienced some form of trauma. And so again, too fast, too much, too soon, for how you personally perceive it. And when we think about trauma, what does it do? It blocks our ability to navigate real life, worldly experiences from a physical space, emotional space, how we show up within our families or communities, the growth that occurs after that, because something has impacted our nervous system, our mind, on our body. Hopefully that answered the question.
That was outstanding. Thank you so much. Because I do think sometimes when we have experienced trauma and it does not meet criteria for a clinician to diagnose us as such, we then minimize our experience. And we feel as if, well, that's not trauma. I've had a lot of people who have told me, well, what do you mean I've experienced trauma? Because they thought it could only be limited to some of the, like you said, the big T's. But I love how you explained it. I read an article a couple of years ago that talked about being love being withheld from you is a form of trauma. And so when you don't get those basic needs met, of love and belongingness and safety that is a traumatic experience, and you shape that really nicely. While you're in that space, can you talk about what it means to be triggered? That's also a big buzzword. I see a lot on social media. That was triggering. I was triggered. Can you talk a little bit about, with respect to trauma, what does it mean to experience a trigger?
Well, let's say here, number one, trigger and activation. And so we can have activation in our body, and me naming this in real time in my hands, they're sweating. I'm not triggered, I'm activated. My nervous system is feeling something because I don't like live, even though I'm doing a live, right? I want to be one on one in a room with you and just having a conversation. And so my body feels a sensation and I'm activated. Triggered may be where that activation or that sweating then comes out of my forehead. My tone of my voice changes. I begin to start crying profusely. I have this big emotional response because maybe I was embarrassed as a child when presenting, or I was ridiculed, or maybe physically hurt because of something that had to do with sharing a piece of my knowledge. So there is a difference between being triggered and activated. And I think at times, activation is not acknowledged versus being fully triggered from an experience. When we think about triggered as well, individuals that have experienced like trauma or PTSD, you might have flashbacks, nightmares. You might have significant body sensations that cause paralyzation. For some folks, extreme anxiety, or for some, even depression, where I'm stuck, can't move, can't get out of bed. These are all those somatic responses that show up when we are triggered. And I can go on, but I want to respect the time. And again, feel free to drop a question or comment in the chat.
Thank you so much for that. I think that is important for people to know the difference between being activated and being triggered. And you explained it in a really easy to understand way, because I think a lot of times when people get the ability to be empowered to use words to describe what they're feeling, it allows them to feel like they can also learn to manage what it is. Because I think a lot of times, again, in being dismissed or misunderstood, not heard, people not showing up and validating them, it is because they didn't have the words to be able to fully accurately describe what they were experiencing in them. And you just gave them the words. That leads me to another point. So you're talking about, and we'll stay in the space of being triggered. You talked about cognitive responses, you talked about kind of emotional responses, the behavioral responses. And one of the reasons why we gathered tonight is because there are so many different ways to manage all of those things. You use somatic as one of your examples. So what we like to do is provide education to people that you can have more than one provider working with you on the various aspects of how you're experiencing your trauma. My focus tends to be more cognitive. So I'm looking at the thoughts that affect how you view and appraise, understand your trauma experience, how you respond to it, whether that is something that you're mindful of or whether it's an automatic response that has been learned because it allowed you to be able to be safe. And so you have created ways to look at situations that your mind tells you, hey, this keeps us safe. When we just allow people to do whatever they're going to do and we don't try to fight them, or we just avoid a situation and don't deal with it at all, or don't put ourselves in that space, or we lock up and can't move when something happens, or if we feel like we have to protect ourselves with our words or with our bodies. And so I understand that there are a lot of different modalities to treat trauma. And so oftentimes for me, because mine is primarily cognitively based, then I will send people to someone who specializes in other types of treatment modalities. And for you, you have a different specialization. Now, they would keep their primary therapist, and then they would come and they would work on specific skills. So, can you talk about what some of your specializations are?
Yes, I can. So I am a certified holistic therapist, certified EMDR therapist, certified in the trauma conscious yoga method. And so all of these are different ways to help holistically address the mind, the body, the emotional piece, the spiritual piece, as well as the communal piece that is impacted by trauma. And so, one of the things when we think about EMDR or utilization of EMDR, short word for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. That's a whole mouthful.
It is.
That's a whole mouthful. But it is a way to address trauma that often is stuck in the body. And so we've done this beautiful work with Dr. Tarver, and we can approach it differently, but my body still feels something. I am still triggered, not activated. And I am stuck in this anxiety or depression or this response. And so EMDR requires no talking. It is a way to address the traumatic experience, whether that is in the present or the past, while you are fully awake, fully in control. We are not forgetting any memories. We're not forgetting experiences. Utilizing bilateral stimulation. So this is activating right and left hemisphere of the brain through either eye movement, tapping, or even sound to help process the trauma while you are fully awake and oriented, looking at me if I'm your provider, and also looking at your experience that you are working through. So 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the present. I sat in a training years ago with Dr. Jackie, and I want to say, I cannot think of her hyphenated name. And this was a training for BIPOC clinicians. And she gave the best example of bilateral stimulation. And so, number one, when we are sleeping during a REM phase of sleep, that's when we typically process experiences. Some of them are too overwhelming, which is why they're trapped in our body. This is why we can't just move forward. And so if we're unable to process them, the bilateral stimulation for EMDR helps us do that while we are awake and conscious. She gave the example of call and response, or even the church clap, back and forth, and we're processing your trauma. That is truly bilateral stimulation, right to left, finger snapping, a clap, maybe eye movement, and we're focused on that traumatic experience. One of the things with EMDR, we have to be able to connect with the body, because again, that's where we're holding those overwhelming experiences. And so somatically, as a provider that incorporates trauma conscious yoga, we are looking at your vagus nerve, so the sole nerve in your body, the part that is having your stomach clench up, maybe the part of your nervous system that have your teeth clench, or maybe when your fists are clenched together, and we are incorporating movement, maybe into that EMDR processing session. We're not only looking at your vagus nerve, maybe we incorporate the sound bowls, because we know that sound has healing energy to release, to let go of those heavy things that you are carrying. So that might be with sound, it might be with music, it might be with vocal tones, even a humming that we might do in session. So all of this is somatic work that we're incorporating to process the trauma that has been stuck in your body. I have to say this other thing. It's heavy work. It's heavy work. When we experience trauma, our right to safety has been taken from us. Our right to consent has been taken from us. Our right to agency has been taken from us. And I notice, and I'm going to speak to my own system in this moment, my feet have now come together. My heart rate has increased. If you notice, my hands are now on my heart. My movement in my hand is like, hey, I need y'all to get this. And so, as a provider that has lived and experienced trauma and knows also the power of EMDR, because I've done it, the power of holistic integration of sound and meditation and breath work, because I'm for embodiment and it's a part of my wellness practice. The power of the working with a therapist that I can speak to, and then community, and then adding this on for my wellness team. What happens when we have choice and agency and safety in our treatment to get to being optimally well? Dr. Tarver, I hope I hit it. Maybe went off on a tangent.
Listen, and we're gonna you didn't go off on a tangent, but you gave everybody a lot of good information. And so I'm going to rewind it back so people can process it a little bit more slowly. You said a few things that I want to hit on. One, you said BIPOC. And so I do want people to know that that is Black, indigenous people of color. So for those clinicians that are working with our Black and brown folks, right, that specialize in a variety of different modalities that take into consideration the whole person as a spiritual being, as a social being, as a financial, all of these aspects is what Tiffany was speaking to. So in case you all were like, what did she just say? That's all she was saying, is that you're getting someone who understands you full person. I also want to spend some time in, you mentioned call and response, and I want to highlight a few things about that. One, I do think that a lot of times people of faith are afraid of certain treatment modalities because they've not heard of them before, but also because they may think that they are things that go against faith-based practice. You mentioned yoga. You mentioned tapping, you mentioned EMDR. And because these things are unfamiliar to people, I love how you were explaining and you said, hey, you're fully present. Everybody is clothed. There isn't, right? Because I do, it's funny, but it's not, because I do understand that unfortunately some providers have taken advantage of their relationships that they've had with people and not created safe spaces. And I do understand that people have trauma that happened at the hands of a faith-based leader who might have said, hey, we're coming in for prayer, or you're coming in and we're going to have this, essentially this ritual. So I do think it's really important for people to understand that this is not devilment, that this is not confusion. This is not taking you away from your faith base, because you can absolutely trust in God and utilize all the resources that God has given you through providers. So this is not witchcraft. This is not weird. This is not pseudoscience. But that call and response that you were talking about is about us being engaged together. You mentioned earlier when we were preparing to come on, someone actually feeling heard and seen and being present and validated. Can you talk a little bit more about the connection that occurs as we're working through being able to reconnect our bodies and our minds, our spirits, to ourselves in this call and response tradition, if you will?
When you think about trauma, or when you think about working with a provider, safety is created by only moving at the speed of trust. And I'm going to slow down when I say that. And so we can go into a space and we can be told that it's safe, that you're safe to be here. But that is a felt sense. You have to feel that in your body. You have to know that in the communication and the language. As a provider, and as Dr. Tarver and I are talking about collaborating, or how you work as a collective, a wellness team, when you are supporting folks that are moving through trauma, it is important that people are witnessed, their stories are heard, that they feel seen and safe in that experience. And so, despite being able to integrate all of these beautiful modalities, it's not, it's finding out the when. So, if I'm moving too fast, I have to be able to notice that as a provider. And I have to also be able to name that for myself. I have to say, hey, there's a fixer part of me, but I notice we're not ready for that. So we're going to reel it back. And that is how relationship is built. That is how trauma processing can have this. I give the example of the lotus flower coming out of murky water, that dark, thick mud, and it moves slowly and blooms. And so we want to have that same ability in that safe space by moving at the speed of trust, by being able to notice when it's too fast, too much, too soon, by being able to consent to whatever modality is being offered and having full understanding. So even when we think about trauma conscious yoga, when I learned of yoga from a westernized lens, so the culture that we live in right now, and honestly, and I'm going to say this, my vision of yoga initially was white women that were thin. And me, as a person of color, as somebody of the global majority, my body's not built for that. Also, spiritually, the messages that were taught to me, that's demonic. And so I had to unlearn, rewrite, invite in, and identify what worked for Tiffany, and then what works for the people that I serve. What offering to reconnect slowly to the body. And why I say slowly also is not just the speed of trust. It hasn't been safe to be in the body. And so when we think about trauma, we're in this activated space of fight, flight, freeze, or even fawn response. So that's the people pleasing. This is what keeps me safe. Because I've experienced something so overwhelming, I'll meet the needs of others. And then we'll be okay. And so because we've been in a constant state of survival, and it's not been okay to slow down and notice, hey, we're in survival, that I'm disconnected from my body. So we want to slowly reconnect. One of the things with trauma conscious yoga, different from your traditional yoga, it's movement. So it might be a neck roll. It might be a gentle raising of the hands and bending to the right and the left, because I carry a lot of grief in my shoulders, right? That's where the pain is. And so we want to notice, how does that feel in our body? And so in this relationship, you're slowly reconnecting, you're slowly gaining awareness, you're slowly being empowered that I have choice and I can do something here. That I have a right to feel again, or I have a right to feel for the first time. Because some of us are carrying wounds from childhood. We don't know what it's like to even, who am I? Hopefully I answered.
You most certainly did. And I think a good segue into this empowerment piece about consent and ownership and finding voice. So as a person is listening to this today and they're thinking, well, maybe I'm one of those people who needs to start doing some of this trauma work. Can you talk to people about how to know when they're ready, how to begin that process of identifying a provider that might be a good fit for them, and what kind of questions maybe they want to ask to get a sense for what the process may be like, so they can understand and be informed and being able to give that consent to getting ready to start that journey?
First, I have to say this: there are many ways to heal. And so, as Dr. Tarver started the conversation, like we all have different modalities and gifts that we utilize in the therapy space. There's no hierarchy of one being better than the other. And so, noticing like where you're at on your journey, when that thought comes up, already the mind is shifting. I want to do something about this. I notice there is a need here, and how I go about that need, this is just the starting point. And so, many ways to heal. You might sneak peek or sit in a sound bath. You might, hey, go to a book club. You might go on a retreat. You might begin to get on Psychology Today or Therapy for Black Girls or all the other directories out there and just begin scrolling profiles. And you're looking for people that are, at minimum, trauma informed. At minimum. That should be in their profile. That should be in their conversation. You are looking for somebody that speaks to you on their profile. What is their little blurb that they say? And not just, hey, I use EMDR, I use CBT. No, speak to my wound. Speak to my pain point. Like, I feel seen in this. I want you to know, like, you can carry me through this story. On that initial 15 or 30-minute call, this is a conversation. This is a conversation. So it's an invitation to ask questions. How do you support folks with trauma? How long do you typically work with individuals? Do you collaborate with other providers? How is your office space set up? Because that matters as well. Like, where's the positioning of the chair? Because sometimes I don't want to have my back up against the wall. So where am I placed? How long have you been working with folks dealing with this issue? And how do you know, like, we're having a roadblock and what shifts are done? One of the things, and this is really big for me because we're human and humans make mistakes. Like, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but we are still students as well, and we're learning, right? And so it's also like the ability to be humble as a provider. This is very important because our culture is built on hierarchy. And so you may go into a space and thinking like they're the therapist or the psychologist and they're up here and I'm here. No. Level playing ground. And feel free to drop a DM to me or an email. I love perusing profiles and saying like, check these people out, interview a couple folks. I like to do that. That's the social worker part of me.
I love that. I do think that sometimes people do need a trustworthy provider to help them find a trustworthy provider. And so, you may also get a referral from your primary care physician or your gynecologist or your therapist that you're seeing who may have a different modality, right? And I love what you said, Tiffany, about like we should never be that vain that we think we are going to be able to address every need. And when recognizing that our clients need different things, we will send them to different places. And so I do think as we get ready to wrap up, because I want to be a good steward of you all's time, that you have, if you haven't learned anything else today, you've learned you've got a trusted, well-informed, licensed, trained provider who you can ask questions, myself as well. And I do want you all to be mindful that there are a lot of spaces on social media that are led by people who are not trained. And so be very mindful about who you're watching and what you're listening to in their recommendations. They may hit all of the buzzwords. However, as Tiffany so eloquently pointed out, check their credentialing, because what we don't want is people to be misinformed or disinformed or have a negative experience and then be set back in their healing journey because they trusted someone who
Yeah.
was not equipped to be able to help guide them in that journey. That being said, Tiffany, do you have some information you want to drop for people so they know how to reach you, where to find you,
I
to
think
get more information?
so. I see this little banner coming up. I think it's dropped.
There it is.
Yes. I'm on IG, of course, if you're on R3 Counseling, of course, website. I'm on Facebook. Feel free to reach out again. I am very passionate about this work. If there are additional questions and so forth, feel free to reach out. We have a book club that R3 is offering beginning this Sunday. We're reading My Grandmother's Hands. That is about racial trauma. That is a collective space for individuals just to begin to start exploring and delving into somatic practices and all the beautiful things that Resma, he is amazing as a clinician, but having conversation and just being in community with other folks, which is so needed because a typical trauma response is to isolate when we are moving through something traumatic. So, again, that's the way to find me. Book club, it's a free offering as well. And so, feel free to join in if you are led. Thank y'all so much. Thank you, Dr. Tarver. This has been amazing. I don't know if there was anything in the chat, so hopefully not.
I saw a great conversation, a lot of good information. So I think we're on track.
All right. Thank you. And I am going to sign off. Yay.
Bye, everyone.